and I'm very honored to present Mrs. Martha Thorne, um, who has been the executive director of the Pritzker Prize for Architecture. And in this capacity, she works closely with the jury. However, he shall not vote in the proceedings. She is currently Dean of the School of Architecture in Madrid, Spain. She served as Associate Curator of the Architecture Department at the Art Institute in Chicago. And she is the editor and author of several books, including the Pritzker Prize for Architecture, the Early Twenties, and the author of numerous articles for architectural journals and encyclopedias. Please, Ms. Marta, hello.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. It's really quite a pleasure to be here with you today, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the first part of the symposium. I thought there were incredible ideas, certainly thought-provoking, and can lead to lots of debate. Again, to Share Architects, thank you so much for the invitation. And I've entitled my short presentation today, Architecture, What Role in the Future? And I want to just talk a couple minutes about prizes, the profession, and education. And it's like so many, questions that we have. We really don't know what the future will hold. And this is some lesson that we're learning because of COVID-19. The challenges of COVID-19 have affected each and every one of us and have called into question our understanding of day-to-day life, what is normal, what we can expect, and what we can rely on. Certainly the scale and the impact and the speed with which this pandemic has spread throughout the world reflect an extreme situation. And it is tempting to talk about architecture in relation to COVID-19, but I'd like to argue that the evolution of architecture has been going on for a long time, certainly decades, and perhaps even more than that, maybe even centuries. But when we look at the pressures being exerted on architecture today, they are quite different. And I'd like to mention technology and the rapid change of the digital world, globalization, urbanism and the rise of urbanism, and also the onset of shared economies. And today I'd like to address the question of architecture and what role for the future, as I mentioned, based on prizes. Because of my role at the Pritzker Prize for about the last 15 years, the profession, because I've had the privilege of following architects and their work from around the world for many, many years. And finally, in terms of education, where I have my day job and my heart right now. I'm trying to control I'm having trouble changing the, double click on the screen. Okay, there, excuse me. The Pritzker Architecture Prize, founded in 1979, has had the same mission since its inception more than 40 years ago. And the idea is to honor living architect or architects through built work. So in other words, as evidenced by buildings and spaces that have been constructed, the qualities of excellence in architecture on one hand and contribution to humanity on the other. And while over the years, the prize has always had the same two goals, the independent jury interprets these in the way it sees fit each year. Now, prizes in general, if we look around the world, prizes in general, we see more and more architectural awards being established. For example, there are many, many awards related to countries, related to foundations. Also today we see a rise in specific purpose awards, awards for sustainability, awards to women. But I think one of the biggest changes that we can see in prizes throughout the world is the idea of rewarding new inventions, not so much looking at an individual, not so much trying to recognize an architect or architects, but looking at the outcome and rewarding new ideas, rewarding inventions, regardless of who has created them. Now, the Pritzker Prize, when it was established back in 1979, and if we look at the citations that the jury wrote, we can see, we can see that they gave awards often to individual architects. They mentioned such things as their talent, their leadership, the quantity and quality of buildings that they had created. And I think this was one direction clearly at the beginning, which also prizes reflect the context and the society in which they exist. So it was normal that Philip Johnson, Frank Gehry, or Renzo Piano would be honored as starchitects. But I do think over the years we have seen an evolution in the Pritzker Prize, and I think it will probably continue in the future. For example, when Glenn Murcutt won the prize in 2002, there was great emphasis on the sustainable qualities of his works, their integration within the landscape, their sensitivity to the local context and climate. Others more recently recognized service to humanity in the forefront. For example, Shigeru Ban, we know of his extensive work in disaster relief shelters around the world, or Alejandro Aravena in 2016, who created the concept of half a house, realizing that shelter is much more than just a roof over one's head, but is a source of security. It's the possibility of opening up doors to future investment. It's directly linked to a family's economic, social, and physical well-being within a community. And most recently, in 2020, we've seen two architects, Shelley McNamara and Yvonne Farrell, from Ireland, who have been rewarded with the Pritzker Prize. I think that if we look back over the years of the Pritzker, in recent years, we will see more variety in the outlooks and approaches of the architects who receive the awards. And I'm particularly pleased when there's an element of the collaborative nature of the practice, the fact that the structure of the office can propose an alternative to the mainstream, or when the architects who are rewarded see the built environment in a much broader or holistic way. Clearly, service to humanity and excellence in architecture can take many different paths, and I think that this is the way of the future. Now, if we look to the profession, there have been enormous pressures put on the profession in recent years. Clearly, technology has changed the way we approach architecture, anything from design to our presentations to clients, to how we look at building materials, the construction process, the chain of value between natural resource and the building component. It even has invaded the financing of buildings. Fintech is a popular word that many of us use. The urbanization has presented challenges not only for architects, but for many people. And how do we make humane environments that are dense? How do we make new cities and revamp old cities in a way that responds to current but also future needs? And let's not forget about global warming and sustainability. These are directly linked to our physical environment as well as our natural environment. The construction industry is one industry which is particularly notorious for waste. It's particularly notorious for not responding to the needs of the environment and not responding to the needs of the inhabitants. And then finally, one other aspect of the profession where I see there is a need for change has to do with the structure of the profession. Often we have architectural offices that are small, they work in an isolated way. We're still looking for the clients to support us, to give us jobs, whether public or private. And we don't always have time to do research, to create knowledge, and then to share it. So as I look to the profession, my hope is that we'll expand the role of architects to go way beyond the idea of architectural design or the small office where they become an author of a project for a particular client. I hope that we can see larger multidisciplinary teams and structures that are collaborative, or maybe a consortia of offices that come together for different projects when needed. I hope there's also a renewed effort for our professional associations to create and share knowledge, not just defend the status quo and the norms or the accreditation procedures of architects. And of course, if we want to change the profession, and we hope we can change the profession, education has a large role to play. And I live this sort of every day in my life as Dean at IE School of Architecture and Design. We're a private institution based in Madrid, yet our student and faculty population come from over 100 countries throughout the world. And I feel the challenges almost every day about preparing students for an uncertain future. Many of us who studied architecture were taught by teachers who simply followed the way they had been taught, and who had also followed, their teachers had followed the way that their masters before them had taught them. Clearly today, we need different skills, we need different ways of understanding the profession, and we need different and more varied roles for the future. Of course, I'm a great believer in that we still need some of the traditional tools, whether it's books or screwdrivers or drills. We need to use our hands as well as our minds. But as we look to the future, I'm reminded of this World Economic Forum discussion about the top skills that are needed in the future. And one thing that has given me great hope about this is that many of the top 10 skills are ones that are intrinsically in the process of architecture and design. So as we look to things in the future, and especially in the face of COVID-19, I would say let's keep the best of architectural education. For example, that process that it has the ability to bring together lots of information, to analyze complex situations, to imagine alternative futures with a constant process of criticism and feedback. Let's keep the best of studio culture, of having students and teachers learn from each other, of being able to look over the shoulder of one another to see what someone else is doing, not for the purpose of copying, but for the purpose of understanding. I also think the collaborative method, as we've seen in the expansion of the Pritzker Prize to 2 and 3 winners at a time, the belief that many people together or several people together can create a more positive outcome than an individual on his or her own is an important way to go. And then finally, linking to that is the question of diversity. Not only diversity in roles, but diversity in backgrounds, diversity in gender, diversity in ages and outlook. With COVID-19, I think we have a very special challenge, and I think more than ever, architects are needed. And this has to do with my belief that architects, more than any other profession, can link together the physical, natural, and digital worlds. And clearly, we need those 3 together if we hope to face our current situation of COVID-19 and the other uncertain futures that may be waiting for us. Thank you very much.
Hi, Marta. We are following something quite interesting right now that was born in the recent years. And these are the appearance of foundations that works with architects and universities, like the Norman Foster Foundation, and which is quite interesting, actually, what they are doing right now. And I think they are in Madrid as well, no? And I've seen and I follow them because they are investigating a lot, and maybe they don't have that much appearance in the public, which I think so. I mean, it's the public is the architects, but that the debate that you raised up could be easily shared with the public, because at the end of the day, every citizen is looking for his own space to live within. And the topic of the architect, as you mentioned, we have the privilege as well to link a lot of aspects of our life, if not all the aspects of our life, together with the technology and the system that will come in the future. Like there could be a very nice question from the public to say, how can be my house or my building built by robots through artificial intelligence? These are all, I mean, these are kind of topics that can make the people more involved in the profession of architecture, in building our own environment. Of course, everybody has to deal with what we can, you know, with the middle. So we are working in a small valley, but we are bringing all the best artists in the world in this small valley. They love to put their energy to build up another future in the valley. We are going to build a crocodile 30 meters long with 32 artists that works together and to design a land art that becomes like a venue space. And so we are doing a lot of effort to, because we are allowed by the politician of this valley to work with them and the population. But we are really working hard, wishing that this could be an example of sharing with citizens about our thoughts and not to keep our thoughts just, you know, between us. So how can we spread?
Davide, I think you made 2 points that I wholeheartedly agree with you. One, the first one, when you talked about the public doesn't always really understand what architects do, and you mentioned engaging more the public. I think that's a key element. I think that without going into why it's like that, if it's historical reasons, it's how architects see themselves, how the development of the profession, that the designer was good, the developer is bad. So there's a lot of reasons that there's misunderstanding between the public and the architecture profession. I know perhaps it happened in the rest of Europe, as in 2008 with the crisis in Spain. Architects were blamed for the crisis. And perhaps in part they did have some responsibility, but they were blamed much more than they should have been. So I think the architecture profession has to somehow engage more with the public, more, as Maliki said, with other professions. They have to not worry about the definition as an artist or the sole author. They have to see themselves more as part of the collective of citizens, but with very special methods and very special ways of approaching problems. And I think that architects need to be much more entrepreneurial, not only to work with foundations and as a matter of fact, Elena Foster and I had an email just yesterday together. But they have to engage also with industry, schools with other schools, schools with private practitioners, to find those areas where maybe a client doesn't exist, but maybe a good idea can find the client or find the public budget to be implemented. And now with COVID-19 more than ever. So I think that's one thing. I think the second point you made about being examples, I think it's beautiful to have a village with art, but thank you so much for saying that that's not the final goal. It's one goal, but a second goal is to be an example for other places, to share that knowledge, to share that experience, so others can benefit from what you've done there. Because if your only goal is to have a little village in Switzerland, you know, it's not enough. It's not enough. But so I thank you for making it a broader goal.
You know, Marta, one thing that I really enjoy about what we are doing, it's a very humble project, but as well ambitious. We are influencing a lot the children that grows up in the village. And all the villagers, all the citizens, you know what they talk about since 3 years in the restaurants? Art, architecture, environment. And this is amazing, wonderful. I mean, the architecture and art, contemporary art with those big names, they came on the table of having a beer together and talking with Daniel Buren, with David Tremlett, big galleries, and all together gathering, you know, like now with social distancing, but physical social distancing, but not a caste social distancing, you know. It's quite interesting, and this is a model that could be in the cities as well. Cities are a group of small villages at the end of the day. I mean, if you live in Seoul, at the end of the day, you live with the neighbors as well. I was living there, and you meet with the neighbors, and you live with them. Not only, it's not that much different. It's just higher.
Yep, exactly. It was interesting, a comment in the debate before, if you'll allow me. I thought it was really interesting talking about density. But there was one thing that bothered me about that, because although the broad measure of density is people per square kilometer, there's also the time factor. And if the density changes throughout the day in different places of the city because of different uses and different time. So I think I'm a great lover and a great believer in cities. As a matter of fact, my own educational institution was hoping to inhabit a 36-story tower in the fall, which now will not happen as they thought. On the other hand, I think physical space and public space that was mentioned before that we need more is a very powerful idea. Yes, we need public space, lots of it, but we also need to change our schedules. We need to change our understanding of where we work so we don't have to travel as much, so that we can walk and ride our bicycles or our motorcycles or scooters. I also think that we have to see, as I'm seeing now, the city of Madrid. As adults, we can go out from 6 to 10 in the morning. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the streets are not full, but there are people in the street, which never happened before. So we're using our spaces throughout the day, which means it's much more efficient. We're taking better care of our space, public spaces, but we should also do it for our buildings. We shouldn't leave a house empty or a building empty 14 hours a day, leave the offices empty or shopping centers empty 14 hours a day. We have to learn how to use our resources, our limited resources, whether it's buildings or public space, in a much more rational and a much more diverse way than we've been doing in the past.
Yeah, in a shortage of time, I will ask you one last question, then we will go with the attendance's questions. You talked about price, profession, and education. About the profession, you said that the profession as it is now, it has to change. And I definitely agree that these traditional studios that we are used to work are not functioning well with the reality outside. My question is, what do you think does the education, because I think that you've mentioned about the topic that the education also has to change. In what way do you think the education should change? And mostly, what's your opinion? What is the role of education? Is it only to educate students or to have a large participation in the public life and promoting architecture?
That's a really difficult question.
I know.
I think if we're talking about changing architecture education and to limit it to that, I think that there has always been the idea from accreditation boards and from the profession that schools of architecture should train architects to be professionals. And intrinsically in that is a very rigid concept, because people tend to want people in the future to be like them. I mean, we see this in juries, we see this in boards, we see this in doctoral dissertation panels. The closer that a subject is to the judges, the more comfortable it is for the judges. So our structure of education and accreditation doesn't want to change. I think that in architecture schools, clearly we have to educate students about their responsibilities of the profession. They're the ones that are going to be impacting the built environment. They have to understand concepts of safety, of sustainability, of history, criticism, art. They have to understand that. But I think the problem with our education is we're telling, or through the accreditation process, we're saying, study all of this and then become this type of architect, this professional. And if you're a design architect with your own studio, then you're way up here. But if you're a sustainability consultant, or if you're a teacher, or if you're a writer, or if you're maybe not even interested in that, then somehow you don't make the grade. So I think it's a balance between the discipline of architecture, which is extremely serious, extremely important, and the education for broader roles. And that's what I tried to mention, these ideas of critical thinking, of embracing technology, not learning technology, but understanding it, to modify it, to see other opportunities. How do we collaborate? How are we more entrepreneurial? So those are the things I think are lacking. I mean, and my school is the daughter of a business school. We can talk about the economic climate. We can talk about demand, about things like that. I'm wondering how many schools of architecture talk about the context, whether it's economic or the demographic or things like that. So I think we need to allow for multiple outlets of our students.
Thank you for your intervention. If I may add something to the topic, as listening to you, I recalled the book of Yuval Noah Harari, the 21 lessons for the 21st century. And then the main thesis of his book is that the challenge that we will face in 21st century will be to face not exploitation, like in 20th century when workers were exploited in industries and in business, but irrelevance because of robotics, because of automatization, because of artificial intelligence. So related to education, how in your school do you tackle this matter of relevance and of this relevance matter of in the profession, that and how architects are trained to tackle this matter?
Yeah, I think it's, again, as I said before, I think it's the design process. And we all like to say it depends on the questions you ask. So asking the right question, it's not concentrating on the final product alone, but the inquiry first, being able to explain why something is needed, justifying or explaining why you've taken a certain approach to a part of the physical environment, explaining the impacts. I'm not so worried about technology. I think if architects embrace technology, it can get rid of a lot of our wasted time. It can help in analysis. It can help in safety and construction sites. It can do so much for us, and then free up the time to do what architects really do best. Because AI, it only can interpret what we give it. So therefore, these complexities and connecting the dots that seem very different and very disparate is a real human, a human quality. So I think, again, it's being critical thinkers, having a broad culture, understanding architecture in a deep way, but not being married to one goal in terms of the profession, to be able to sort of jump around to different jobs or professions depending on what's needed in the 21st century.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
You said something interesting about professional association. We are a professional organization and so on. How do you said something interesting and I forget to write down what you said. Okay, please, in just 1 minute, please explain to us what do you think?
You're asking me, I think professional organizations they need to transform themselves as well. And we've seen this, if you look at the AIA, RIBA, even here in Madrid and Spain, the professional association, it's not needed to give licenses for building. It's not needed to collect funds for architects. It has to do something else. So I think professional associations, more than anybody, should take the lead. They should look to the future and try to provide knowledge that's needed by architects in the future, the place for creating and sharing knowledge across geographies. Just things like you're doing with the webinar, I think, is one example of a great thing. And I also think that they should be pushing education to also expand its mission. And I think professional associations could be fundamental in helping the public understand, breaking down the silo and helping the public feel that architects, politicians, the public, industry, we're all on the same team, and how can we do that?
Okay, thank you very much.